Hi all, welcome to Common Sense Ethics. My name is Leah. This is just a quick reminder before we start to, if you like this video, thumbs it up and subscribe to the channel and make sure the little bell icon is filled in so that you get notifications when I publish a new video. So, today I want to talk really quickly about political parties and partisanism and how being partisan and partisanism tends to really inhibit our critical thinking and kind of dumb us down. So let's get right into it. There are 4 ways that I think this phenomena happens. The first is that partisanism really creates false dichotomies. So a false dichotomy is a logical fallacy that's based on an either-or type of argument. Basically 2 choices are presented when in reality there are more that exist, and the claims are presented as either one is false and one is true, or one is acceptable and one isn't, when often there are other alternatives to this that haven't been considered, or both choices might be false, right? So now this, of course, is an error that people make, and they don't know they're making it. So it's not entirely the fault of political parties that this error in reasoning happens, but I'm saying the phenomenon of partisanship really tends to exacerbate this, right? And you see it all the time. I mean, I'm independent, and you know, people all too commonly think in black and white terms and along party lines. You know, it's very easy for people who are partisan to say things like, oh, well, if you're against this candidate, you must be for the other candidate. Or if you don't like this idea, you must be for the other side's idea. When in reality, you know, it's not necessarily like that. There's probably other alternatives that we haven't considered or that actually might be better. And so people who are partisan, it's really hard for them to understand this mindset. Everything is either black and white, left or right to them. So the second way that partisanship and political parties tend to dumb us down is that they artificially shape our opinions. Many of you may be familiar with the philosopher Jacques Ellul. He's one of my favorite philosophers. I've spoken about him before. But in his book Propaganda, he said the following thing: parties channel free-floating opinion into existing formulas, polarizing it on opposites that do not necessarily correspond to the original tenets of such opinions. Because parties are so rigid, they deal with only a part of any question. And because they are purely politically motivated, they distort public opinion and prevent it from forming naturally. And I really tend to agree with this. I think parties tend to exist more for consensus-forming reasons or other practical reasons, not because they are committed to any sort of principle or any sort of virtue. You know, this is one thing that I wish more people understood, and I'll get into that a little bit later in this video. So the third way that partisanship tends to dumb us down or make us ignorant is that when you are a partisan and you belong to one political party or support one political party, it means that you are going to be subjected to groupthink, at least to some extent. Identity politics is problematic like this as well, because it really can induce groupthink and tribalism. But the term groupthink derives from the work of the psychologist Irving Janis from the early 1970s. He did a lot of research on group dynamics, and he coined the term after Newspeak in George Orwell's 1984. Now, groupthink, according to Irving Janis, is a non-deliberate suppression of critical thought as a result of the internalization of a group's norms. So as groups gain more internal cohesion or more internal agreement, the risk of groupthink increases because people don't want to do anything that might jeopardize their membership in that group or that would anger the other group members. So, you know, one way to consider whether you're being affected by groupthink is, are there any areas of your life where you would pressure a dissenter to change his or her views, right? Is there any group in which you automatically agree with the opinions of the group? If you're a partisan, you may tend to agree with the opinions of your political party without much critical thought, and that's a problem. And that means you're being subjected to groupthink. or you're a victim of groupthink. And also, so are there any groups where you view opposing groups as evil, stupid, or weak? And when you're partisan, it's really easy to view, members of the opposite political party as stupid or evil or ignorant and so on and so forth. But, really that's a product of groupthink. It's not necessarily true. So the fourth and the last way that I think partisanship tends to inhibit critical thinking and make people more ignorant is that political parties and partisanship really tends to make us ignore realpolitik. So the term realpolitik was coined by Ludwig von Rochow. I think I'm mispronouncing that. I can't always pronounce German very well. But he was a politician, a German politician from the 19th century. Realpolitik is politics or diplomacy that is based on considerations of given circumstances and factors rather than ideological notions or moral or ethical premises. Now, there's a historian, John Bew, and he argues that the term realpolitik has changed somewhat since its inception in the 19th century. He thought that the idea originally, as it was coined, applied to it attempt to answer sort of the conundrum of how to achieve liberal, enlightened goals in a world that does not follow liberal, enlightened rules. And many of you will recall I did a video about sort of the limitations of liberal democracy and the philosophy of liberalism generally. And so that's interesting. But today, the term realpolitik tends to mean that policy is chiefly based on the pursuit or the application of power and not on any sort of virtue or ethical concerns. And so with an understanding of realpolitik, you can see why political parties will eventually violate and do violate the same principles that they supposedly hold so dear. And much of what they do is based on political realism and the pursuit of power, not on some kind of ideal or moral principle. And that's very clear when you're nonpartisan. You can see that both parties or all parties, do this type of thing, and that's because of realpolitik. Whereas if you're partisan, you tend to think that my party is always doing right, and it tends, it really tends to inhibit critical thinking in that way. So, solutions. What can we do about this? So, I think to think critically about politics, it really helps to remain somewhat independent and nonpartisan. And it's better to be committed to principles generally than to be partisan. So being nonpartisan lets you focus on the bigger picture. And then you can see that maybe sometimes one political party will violate your principles and sometimes another political party will violate them. And it really helps you to think more critically about it than if you are narrowly partisan. So the economist Jeffery Tucker, he also had a similar sort of low opinion of choosing sides and of sort of the team sport, one side versus the other politics. And he writes, by maintaining your objectivity and principles in these times, you will be in the minority. Tell me about that. But it is not easy in such a hugely partisan political environment to stay independent, think clearly, watch carefully, adhere to principle, speak fearlessly, praise when good things happen and criticize when bad things happen, and tell the truth as you see it, and otherwise be vigilant in defense of rights and liberties of you and everybody else. And just one more quote to leave you with before we wrap up here. At all times, sincere friends of freedom have been rare, says Lord Acton, and the triumphs of freedom, have been due to small political minorities. So I just thought I'd leave you with that. And anyway, if you enjoyed this video, this is just another quick reminder to subscribe. I'll be putting out more content like this. So that's all, folks. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.